about the YNW Melly case. I haven't seen too many videos on it, so I figured I would do a video on it. I've been watching the trial and I thought maybe you guys would want to know what's going on in the trial instead of actually watching 8 hours of video of live coverage. I would sum it up for you and just give it to you as short and simple as I can, and just pointing out the highlights of day one. So YNW Melly is on trial for first-degree double homicide, and he does have a co-defendant named Cortland Henry. He is also going to be on trial for a first-degree homicide, but his trial is going to come later. They both have pled not guilty, so this is why they are having a trial. If they would have pled guilty, then a trial wouldn't be happening. Prosecutors are saying on October 26, 2018, Melly and his co-defendant had his friends inside of his car. Melly saying that he didn't do it and that it was a drive-by shooting, and that's what killed his friends. So like I said, I'm just gonna try to break this down as plain and simple to you guys and just give you all the key points, and let's just get into it. Jamel Damons, aka YNW Melly, is a 24-year-old rapper from Florida. He became famous in the 2010s, and he is most notably known for his song that's called My Mind. In this song, he describes how he his friends. I mean, how ironic is that? And yes, the song did come out after his friends were. On February 13, 2019, YNW Melly and his co-defendant YNW Portland, also known as Cortland Henry, they were both charged with first-degree double homicide of YNW Juvie, also known as Anthony Williams, and YNW Sack Chaser, also known as Christopher Thomas Jr. Cortland was later granted house arrest in May 2020. They could possibly both be sentenced to death. On day one of the trial, the prosecution gave their opening statement, and in their opening statement, they described why they charged them with first-degree murder. They said that Cortland Henry is questioned that night about the shooting. He tells the detective an account of what happened that night. He says they were all at a recording studio and then they were driving home, and he was getting off of an exit, and on the highway they were shot at. He said he ducked down while he was driving the car, and he was able to still have control of the car, but while he was doing that, he didn't see who was shooting at them or what was going on. He just drove to the nearest hospital. He arrived at the Memorial Miramar Hospital at 4:35, and he runs into the hospital, and then he explains to the security guard there what had just happened. Prosecution is saying that his account of the story is false because there's no evidence at the location he said that the drive-by occurred at. Police checked the scene, which is Miramar Parkway, and couldn't find any evidence of a drive-by shooting happening there. There were no shell casings, no glass fragments, no projectiles, no tire marks. The Jeep that this occurred in had 16 bullet holes. It had broken windows. So they're just sitting there like, where's all the evidence? Because there should be a lot of evidence for what happened here. The police went to the recording studio to see if there were any surveillance cameras, and come to find out, there were. So the police collected the surveillance cameras and they looked at it, and they realized that there were 4 people in the car instead of 3. And when they watched closely, they realized that the 4th person was Melly, YNW Melly. He was the 4th person, and he was sitting behind the driver's seat in the rear passenger. They also learned that there were 8 people total that night at the studio, and you can see them coming out the studio, and there are 2 cars there. There's a red Mitsubishi and a gray Jeep. So 4 passengers got into the red Mitsubishi. Their names were Travion Glass, Dontavius Withers, Jacoby Mills, and Adrian Davis. They all got into the red Mitsubishi. In the gray Jeep, Anthony Williams was in the front passenger seat. Behind him in the rear driver's seat was Jamel Damons, that's Melly, and Christopher Thomas next to him in the rear passenger seat. Prosecution says that traffic cameras saw the Jeep traveling from the recording studio all the way onto I-95 South and then to Miramar Parkway, and during this time you never see them stop at all. They say that all of this is backed up by cell phone evidence. You can see as they're coming out the recording studio, Melly is on his phone, and then he gets into the vehicle. They said that Anthony also had his phone on him, and prosecution says that they shared the same phone plan and they have the same exact phone model. Prosecution said this makes it easier to see how the 2 phones track together since they were on the same plan. Dontavius also had the same phone plan as them, and his phone was tracking the same way as theirs was. You can see the two vehicles break up, and the red Mitsubishi goes towards the house and the gray Jeep goes towards the Everglades. It goes by a trash facility on a dead-end road, and you can see the vehicle stop there around 4 a.m. They say this is when Melly got out of the car and staged a drive-by shooting. So he got outside the vehicle and shot the car himself. Prosecution is saying that Melly is trying to say that while along the ride, when the two cars were driving together, he had gotten out the vehicle at some point and got into the red Mitsubishi and went back to the house with them. But prosecution is saying, based on the phone records, it shows that Melly was traveling with the Jeep the whole time. The Jeep is eventually examined, and all of the ballistic evidence is coming from the driver's side to the passenger side and the rear of the car towards the front. The medical examiners did an examination on the victim's body, and they discovered that the fatal wounds coming from them are coming from inside the vehicle from the rear driver's side to the passenger side. They also said that the victims were already dead by the time of the staged drive-by. The police did find one shell casing inside the vehicle, and prosecution is saying that this shows that the gun was fired inside the vehicle, not outside the vehicle. Police searched for the weapon and they were not able to find it. So prosecution wasn't able to reenact to see if this is what really happened with that type of weapon. The prosecution said on November 21st, the police got the cell phone locations of Anthony, Melly, and Christopher, and they went to that location, and what they found would prove that this is where it happened. At this location, they found 8 shell casings. According to cell phone records, this happened at 4:02 a.m. and then afterwards you can see all 3 cell phones moving together for 20 minutes. At the time of the staged drive-by shooting, Melly had FaceTime his girlfriend, letting him know that he was just in a drive-by shooting and he thinks that his friends are dead. During this time, he sent a drop pin from his phone, so that's just showing his location, to his friend Frederick Gibbons so he can come and pick him up. On Melly's phone, he has a health tracker which shows his footsteps, so prosecution is saying that Melly did have his phone and it shows he was there at that location using it. The prosecution was to show that Melly did physically have his phone and he was using it. They go through times where he's on his phone identifying himself, saying, hey, this is Melly, hey, this is Melly, to show that this is actually his phone. Prosecution also wants it to be known that he is a member of the G Shine Blood gang set, and they show evidence showing that he is an active member in this gang. They say after people found out about the shooting, they all started to message Melly to see if he was okay. And one message he got, it said, yo homie, you good? Melly replies and says, I did that
Multiple messages are coming in. Messages are coming in from individuals checking to see if he's okay, if he's been injured in this drive-by. If it's true that Anthony Williams, who's also sometimes referred to as Sack, and Chris Thomas, who is referred to as Juby, are really dead. One individual, and specifically, sends out, and I want to quote the message exactly that you will hear, and says, right after this, yo homie, you good? The context around the messages matters. So in the context of this message, this individual is reaching out, asking if Mr. Demmons is good, after he's been tagged in multiple social media posts about this drive-through, this shooting. And Mr. Demmons responds very succinctly, I did that. Shh.
Bernarda, sometimes it's not the crime, but the cover-up that gets the defendant in hot water. How damaging is the defense that this investigation occurred and they tried to make it look like a drive-by shooting, but it actually wasn't?
So for the prosecution, this is one of the strongest piece of evidence that they're using. So in a prosecution where you're talking about someone giving up a false information or a false lie or a false narrative, and you can prove that, that is an argument for the prosecution to say, wait, the reason that they're lying, the reason that they came up with that lie is because they're trying to cover up the truth. And that truth is that the person actually committed the crime. So the cover up sometimes is worse than the crime itself.
Yeah.
So now is the defense counsel's opening statement time. That's the counselors for Melly, his attorneys. They get up and they say that this case is just riddled with doubt. They say that Melly didn't decide to wake up one day and just his friends. He lets it be known that the prosecution did 4 years of investigating and they still can't come up with a motive for why Melly would want to do this.
And if after 4 years of investigation, the state comes and says, hey, he killed 2 of his friends, his best friends, and you're wondering why, and their answer is, oh, I don't know. That's the first indication that they're just guessing and don't know what they're talking. And that, ladies and gentlemen, by itself is reasonable doubt.
The defense wants it to be known that he feels like the detective was just trying to say it was Melly because he knew that he was a rising star, and if the detective's name was attached to this, then maybe some type of notoriety, like some type of recognition, and that maybe he would kind of become famous too. The defense says that there were a number of leads that were ignored or didn't have any attention to, and they want you to know that there are other people that could have committed this crime and it wasn't Melly. So for example, they say that Cortland Henry could be a suspect because he told many lies on his own, and he lies about where and how the shooting happened, and he also said that he didn't even have a phone. And when he talks to authorities, he had a change of clothes, he had gunpowder residue on his hands. They painted him as a victim and they kept an eye on him, but they did not investigate where he went afterwards, and they didn't search his house or anywhere that he was going to. Another lead is Montrell Roll and his sister. The police discovered jail calls from between them talking about the murders, and they had intimate details that the public didn't know. So they had inside information on these murders that the outside people didn't know about. So to the defense, they feel like this should have been a lead as well, because how do you know this information? The detectives did talk to them, and they told them that they heard this information from the streets, and the detectives were like, okay, good enough for me, and they didn't investigate any further. Another lead is Robert Colbert. He had a social media account and he posted, quote, LOL, we killed 2 of me. It took police 7 months to even talk to Robert about this, and he claimed that he sold his social media account for $20 to someone else. They asked Robert if he was in the vicinity or if he committed the murders, and he said no, and the detectives were like, okay, good enough for me again. So the defense counsel is saying, why would you sell your social media if you didn't have anything to hide? Clearly you're trying to hide your identity and you don't want any ties to it. Another lead is David Hedgepath. He posted on social media that he actually did commit the It took police a year and a half to actually talk to him, and when they talked to him, they were like, okay, yeah, he didn't do it. And they knew about him all the way in the beginning of the investigation. There are other people in this case that weren't investigated properly as well, and I'm pretty sure the defense will go into that. When the prosecution got the case and they looked into it, they were like, what is going on here? They realized the case had been botched from the beginning, so they took the Merrimore Police Department off, and they put the Broward Sheriff's Office into place to investigate this case from the beginning. They started all over again because the case was botched. Apparently, they said, this is the worst thing I have seen in my life. Regarding the cell phones, the defense counsel says that all these cell phones were on the same plan and they were used interchangeably. So different people would use different cell phones and they would just switch back and forth. Not one person was tied to one cell phone.
Defense opening, I mean, I dare even say great, but what makes it so good in your eyes?
Well, I think we all think it was pretty strong. First of all, he talks about that motive, and no, the prosecution doesn't have to prove motive, but it doesn't make sense. Why would you kill your 2 best friends? The other issue is he said it was a shoddy investigation. In fact, he said it was fabricated, not investigated. And he didn't just make that claim, he actually went into detail. He said that the Broward County office had to actually restart the entire investigation, saying that the Miramar police didn't do their job. That's a big statement to make. He's going to have to back that up. But he also said that they didn't follow up on leads for years. There were people who were talking about intimate details. They didn't follow that up. They didn't get a search warrant to search the house that Henry went into. There were so many things that they failed to do, and it was really very specific, and I think that that is going to be something that's going to convince that jury that he's not just making, false claims. He's not just drawing a wide brush. He's actually backing up with specifics.
So next, Officer Jessica Mengor takes the stand. On October 26, 2018, Officer Amingor was working at the Miramore Memorial Hospital. She was working there as an officer and she was protecting the facility. She says she was sitting at the security guard desk and she saw Cortland run into the emergency room, and he ran up to her and he was very excited and he said that he needed her help. She said she walked outside and right in front of the entrance was a blue Jeep. She said the vehicle had multiple bullet holes on the right side and she saw two unresponsive bodies, one in the front passenger seat and one in the rear passenger seat. She said she immediately radioed for help because she knew she couldn't handle the situation alone. And she went over to the front passenger to see if he was still alive. She checked his pulse and he was not. And she went and checked on the passenger in the back and he wasn't alive as well. She said she told Cortland to go and to sit down on the side while she was trying to do all this. Cortland had told the officer that he had just left the recording studio and he was on his way back home. He was driving on the highway. He's not familiar with the area, but he was driving on the highway. He was getting off the exit and then a vehicle just started shooting at him. And he said he was ducking and trying to still drive, and he just went to the nearest hospital. The officer didn't observe any injuries or bullet holes in Cortland. She told him actually that he was very lucky that he didn't get hit because of all the bullet holes she was seeing on the vehicle. The prosecution shows a video of Cortland arriving at the hospital. You can see him running into the hospital and getting the officer. You can see them talking outside of the hospital doors, and she has him sit down. She was asking him questions about where this could have possibly happened, and she narrowed down a location that she believed this could have happened at. Some time goes by, and then you can see a stretcher come, and they bring the victims inside the hospital. You can see the officers responding shortly after. Officer Amingor told the other officers where she believed the crime scene occurred, and they decided to go over there and to check it out. The defense asked the officer if Cortland was wearing a black hoodie. She said yes. She also said that her initial conversation was documented with him, but not the entire thing. But she also said that her radioed conversations were documented. The defense wanted to show that the officer was unsure of Cortland's movements, like the timestamps of his movements, that she didn't know what he was doing at what time. He also wanted to show that she didn't know who was at the hospital at that time. She wasn't documenting who she saw coming through, who was who basically. But she did say that she did not see Melly at the hospital. The prosecution redirected the officer, and they wanted it to be known that her duties that night was not to keep a log of who was coming in and out the hospital or keep documentation. Officer John Hutchinson gets on the stand. He said when he got to the scene, he did see the Jeep with the doors open. The hospital staff was running back and forth to the car. When he looked inside the vehicle, he saw two victims that were suffering from gunshot wounds. He helped the hospital staff put the victims onto the stretcher, and then that's when he began to start a crime scene log. And he stayed by the vehicle to make sure that no one tampered with anything. After the detective, Hector Bertrand, took the stand. While he was on the stand, he showed a map of the location of the alleged drive-by shooting. He also describes arriving to the crime scene. He said when he was there, he talked to Cortland twice, and both those times were recorded. The prosecution plays the recording. In the recording, you can hear the detective talking to Cortland, and he's asking him what happened. Cortland describes his travels to the hospital. He describes the road he was on, what lane he was in, what stores he passed. He says that he doesn't know who was shooting at them or what was happening. The detectives confront him and say that they shut down the entire area and they searched the area and they can't find any evidence of a shooting. They said that they know of a different area where a shooting occurred, but you're not saying that you were at that location. And Cortland just keeps telling them, like, I'm telling you the truth. I'm telling you the truth. They ask him if he's had any issues with anyone, if he has any beef with anybody, and he said he's a recording artist and everyone is jealous of him. Basically, there's a lot of jealousy that comes with becoming a recording artist. And they said, well, what's your artist name? And he said, YNW. And he said, well, what's your nickname? What do people call you? And he said, they just call me by my name. And they said, okay, so does Anthony have a nickname? And he was like, Anthony's nickname is Sack. And they were like, okay, does Christopher have a nickname? And he said, well, his nickname is Juvie. Cortland goes back to describing the drive-by shooting. He said he's driving and he's ducking and he hits a guardrail, but he continues to drive and he still doesn't see what's going on. The detectives ask him if he has a cell phone, and he says, no, I don't have a cell phone. And then they ask him if he knows where the victims live, and he said, yeah, I know where the victims live, and he told them their address. And they also ask him if he knows their ages, and he goes, yeah, I know their ages, and then he tells them their ages. They ask him if he has any social media beef. He says, no, I don't have any social media beef. They said, okay, what are your names on social media? I want all of your names. So he says his is YNW Portland, Anthony's is YNW Sack Chaser, and Christopher's is YNW Juvie. So they're realizing that everybody has YNW before their names. So they ask him, they say, okay, so what does YNW stand for? And he says YNW stands for Young Dave. They ask him again if he has any beefs with anybody, and he started to describe a situation that happened with one of them at a Walmart. Apparently there was some type of fight or some type of altercation, so he starts to tell them about that. The detectives ask him, are you affiliated with any gangs? And he's like, no, I'm not affiliated with any gangs. None of us are affiliated with any gangs. They ask him if he has shot in a gun that day. He goes, no, I did not shoot any guns. They said, well, your car smells like weed. Were you smoking weed in there? And he kind of didn't want to admit it. And he was like, are you a drug dealer? And he was like, okay, we were smoking weed in the car. No, we don't deal drugs. We're not a drug dealer. And he said, okay, so what kind of jobs do you guys have? Like, how are you able to afford all these things? He says that Melly is a recording artist. He's also a recording artist, and they're signed to a label, and that's how they're able to pay for all their stuff. The officers ask him if there's anything else you want to say to us to help us solve your friend's murders. If you're involved in any illegal activity, this is your time to tell us. We don't care about that. We're not trying to get you jammed up with stuff like that. We just want to know if there's any information that you have that can help us. And then at this point, he says that he doesn't want to talk to them anymore. The detectives say that they're going to ask him a question, and they say that they want him to answer this honestly. And they ask him, they said, if you knew who did this, would you tell us? And Cortland says, no. And the detectives say, so you rather handle this on your own? And he says, yeah. They ask him where the recording studio is, and Cortland provides landmarks since he's new to the area. He doesn't know the area. And that's how the detectives found out where the recording studio is. While the detective was on a stand, he says that Cortland never mentioned that there was a fourth person. He only mentioned the three of them. And we know that that fourth person is Melly, so apparently he never mentioned that Melly was in the car with them at all. The defense came up and began to ask the detective questions. He said that Cortland had gave him the address of where they were living. He said, did you ever go to the address and search the residence for any type of evidence? The detective says no. And the defense says, so it didn't occur to you that the person that was with them while they were murdered could have anything to do with this, so you didn't go back to the house to search for evidence? And the detective is like, no. And then the defense goes, so the person who has been telling you lies and was with the victims had two deceased people in his vehicle. You did not go to check him out and check the residence to see if there was any type of evidence there. And the detective says, no. The defense counsel also mentions the other names that Cortland had mentioned that they could have had beef with. And he says, so did you check them out? Since he gave you some people that could have done this, did you check them out? And the detective says, no. The prosecution gets up and redirects the detective, and they say, well, how come you didn't check the residence? And he said, you need probable cause to check a residence. And for this situation, we did not have probable cause to check the residence. And then the prosecution's like, okay. Okay, so now Morgan Corey gets on a stand, and she is, to sum it all up, she is a forensic consultant. She has a lot of fancy names, but she is basically a forensic consultant. She's very good at her job. She knows what she's doing, and she took pictures of the bodies and described the photos that she had taken. She also showed the clothing items the victims were wearing. While the clothing evidence was being presented, you can see Melly, and he has his head resting on his fist like he was just completely uninterested. While she was on the stand, she also showed pictures of clothing, glass, and shell casings. She then goes on to explain the photos of the crime scene. So that was the end of the first day of trial. I just picked pieces that I thought were very important, and I just wanted to put it all together for you guys so you can get an idea of what's going on here and not have to sit through 8 hours of live coverage when I could just sum it up for you very quickly. So I just want to go over everything one more time and just put it all together so you can get an idea of what's going on in this trial. So Melly and Cortland Henry are accused of killing 2 of their friends. Melly's best friend, Cortland Henry, showed up at the hospital claiming his friends were caught in a drive-by shooting and they were bleeding out in his car. Anthony Williams and Christopher Thomas had multiple gunshot wounds and were pronounced dead. Cortland said that they were leaving a recording studio when the drive-by occurred. Police said that there was no evidence of a drive-by shooting and the victims were shot by someone in the car. Surveillance evidence showed 4 men in the car, including Melly. Melly and Cortland are now charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. So let me know what you guys think. Are you on the prosecution side? Are you on the defense side? Are you on your own side? Do you think something else happened? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.